ॐ महामाये जगन्माता कालिके घोरदक्षिणे गृहाणवन्दनं देवी नमस्ते परमेश्वरी ॐ गृहाणवन्दनं माता सदा विजयवर्धिनी पादपद्मं सदा वन्दे स्थानं देहि पदाम्बुजे स्थानं देहि पदाम्बुजे. Jai Ma, thank you all so much for coming. This is really special Diwali because so many people from so many different places came together, and usually it's like a particular sangha from a particular place might come and stay here and we'll do puja and all that. But now it's so many different sanghas from so many different parts of the country and parts of the world too, because Tarama is coming straight from Rome, etc. And like there's something about that, the fact that there's already this like, sense of all of us being connected through what we call the Guru Mandala. There's something about being in the room together and feeling that in such a palpable and tangible way. So the first thing to notice here is that God can be compared to perhaps sunlight, going off of Bhairava Nandaji's beautiful Pravachana on sun, being the centerpiece of our tradition. If God is indeed sunlight, and in the daytime sunlight is indeed all pervasive, then we have to consider the role of a magnifying glass. And that's what essentially the Vedas, the Upanishads, the Tantras, Agamas, what our literature is essentially doing. It is a peer-reviewed, corroborated, ancient source of magnification of sunlight. So it's not that it gives us access to something that isn't already there. It just makes available in a very tangible and immediate way what is always all pervasively available. So the Murti acts as a magnifying glass. In truth, God is reflected in all things as all things. Yet when we do the work to awaken the Murti, all we're doing is creating a sort of magnifying glass effect, and where all pervasive nature of God is indeed a given, in the Murti, in the Vigraha, we feel an especially strong presence. And we start with that. So some people don't like to start with idol worship. They think, oh, why should I worship this clay? Why should I worship this brass? And Swami Vivekananda was very partial to this view, actually. But once he said to an audience in South India, I think, he said, if idol worship can make you a Sri Ramakrishna, then I say take 10,000 idols. So the question then is, it's not about whether or not the thing is inherently valuable. The Bible itself tells us to judge things by the fruits. So the question then is, let's think about some idol worshippers, and especially idol worshippers of Mother Kali, and let's see what happened to them. Because I don't have any authority actually to say anything about Kali. Because often when people talk about Kali, they just project whatever they want. Often because she is everything without any kind of negation. So in that sense, anything really goes with Mother Kali. So we find that as human beings, we're always inclined, subconsciously, to alter the narrative about Mother Kali to suit whatever agenda it is that we're trying to champion in that event. This is how God is discussed in almost every religious context. We decide what we think God means, and then if someone has a particular amount of charisma, they will project and impose that view of God on everyone else. So God forbid I should do that. I cannot tell you anything about Kali. And if you've heard anything about Kali from me, it's very important that you discount it immediately. Because you cannot talk about electricity. I'll point to a principle here. It's very important to understand this. Electricity itself is not known, actually. Its effects are. What it is exactly you can define, but naming is not explaining. You can say, oh, it's the flow of negative charges to positive, whatever. You can give any definition you want. But you can't actually see electricity directly. You see its effects like light, like heat. Right? Isn't that interesting? Or like, for instance, the way an appliance might work. It's the cause, electricity. The effect is that you can make toast or something. So we can talk about the effects. Why? Because the effects are tangible. They're something that we can verify. And that's why scriptures are important. Like above all in our community, especially as you can see with Bhairavananda and whatnot, we're trying our best to represent a tradition authentically, but that means being really honest about what we think and what the tradition thinks in places where that will diverge. And the most important thing for us is that we do not diverge from the Guru Parampara, that we present the tradition as is, because of our faith in the tradition, not as a religion, but as a very reliable epistemological and intellectual structure, because of its peer review, because of its checks and balances. So that being said, the scriptures, like, when you go to the scriptures for Mother Kali, you can make some claims about Mother Kali. But I think sometimes it's better just to go to those practitioners of Mother Kali and to see what Mother Kali meant for them. What happens in a person's life when they plug into this electric socket? That's the only thing I think we can speak about tangibly. These things can be verified. They can be seen, observed. They're physical, as it were. So coming now to Sri Ramakrishna, to Komalakanta, to Ramprasad, these are maybe the three names that we should have, I think, foremost in our minds when we're thinking about Kali. Holy Mother, of course, Sarada Devi, Swami Vivekananda. These are all like contemporary historical examples of Kali Bhaktas. The reason I like these examples is because they are not yet really the stuff of legends. Now, give it a few hundred years, and of course the narrative on Sri Ramakrishna will become increasingly fanciful, which is fine. And in fact, that might have been how it was actually. It might have been way more fanciful than it's even presented. But it's possible that over time we turn our ideals into like mythological heroes, and they become more and more divinized. And in that process, we forget about their humanness, and we don't feel like we ourselves can achieve that level. So you can think about Vivekananda. He was very insistent upon this, that you don't worship him. He said, actually, interestingly, if you do puja to me, if you ring bells and wave incense to me, I will come back as a ghost and strangle you. Because he was very sensitive to this idea of like you becoming Vivekananda as opposed to worshipping Vivekananda. So it's very easy to turn these figures, Ramakrishna, Komalakanta, Ramprasad, into like some mythological hero that we don't actually believe has anything to do with us or our practice. Sometimes we sing their songs, sometimes we read their biographies, we keep their pictures, but then we have all our own ideas about Mother Kali, and ideas that are predominantly self-serving, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just these practitioners often challenge those ideas when we take the time to study their lives. So with Ramprasad, this is a very interesting thing. He, as you know, above all is known for his music. So Ramprasad, above all, is like a singer, a musician that popularizes Kali. So we've given many, many lectures on Ramprasad. He's an incredibly important figure for all the people worshipping Mother Kali all over India and arguably all over the world. And most importantly for our tradition, because there's a strong bhavik, and I'll explain that in a bit, bhavik link between Sri Ramakrishna and Ramprasad. Although they weren't actually in a tradition, they were, but they weren't actually in a parampara, there's a strong link between the two of them, and that has immediate relevance for the way that we approach Mother Kali, the sentiment with which we take up this sadhana. So with Ramprasad, he's known for his music, and the contribution there uniquely is he takes a Sanskrit-based, very esoteric, very elite, and incredibly secret tradition, secret for reasons that we explored elsewhere, and he makes it mainstream. So like Ramprasad does something that no one would ever have thought to do. He mainstreams Kali. And arguably, when you look at something like the Kalakashtakam, you can see if the Kalakashtakam was indeed written by Sri Shankaracharya, as indeed it does say at the end, then it seems like this attempt was made before by someone like Shankaracharya. And when he tried to present Mother Kali, he felt it was necessary to say, Kshamasva me. Please forgive me my sin. He almost uses the word aparadha. And the aparadha, the sin, the error here is revealing in the marketplace, in the middle of the world, madhya loke, in the middle of the public, marketplace of ideas. What's the verse?
Kshamasva paradam mahagupta bhavam mayaloka madhye prakashikritam yat. I've illuminated your knowledge in broad daylight.
Yeah. Prakasha, I've revealed in broad daylight that which perhaps is best kept secret. Because Mahagupta, it's a great secret. Kali is a great secret. She's an incredibly esoteric deity for obvious reasons, given how transgressive she is in literally every culture, even in like America, where the 60s and 70s happened, even where in like, a Western liberal democracy, there's so much social progressiveness. Even in that context, Kali is challenging for a Protestant ethos. Like channels teaching lessons on Mother Kali are still subject to getting banned on YouTube. It's an interesting thought, right? That like there's so much content available, but there's something about Mother Kali that's uniquely problematic. It's not just violence. There's a lot of violent content available that we as a society have normalized. We're like more okay with school shootings in the country. Like it's like more normal to think about people getting shot up at schools than it is to actually interact with the philosophies and practices of Mother Kali. The way that Mother Kali works on the psyche is much more disturbing than thinking about, I think, things like school shootings, because she is a systematic deconstruction of almost every human sentiment, whether that's morality or language or thought or reason. So madness and wildness has always been the centerpiece of Mother Kali, but unlike the aestheticized forms of those things that we get in the media, she's the real deal. She like really represents that energy, which I think in the media we sometimes portray in a consumer capitalist bid to get people's attention. So when they come to Kali, all the people playing at being goths realize that it takes more than just black nail polish and black clothes to understand darkness. And when they come to Mother Kali, they sense the real thing. People who are experiencing violence in the world, that's nothing actually. The external violence is nothing but a reflection of a deep embedded internal violence. And when we come to Mother Kali, she brings us to that. And at the core of that violence, we find our eros, our sexuality. We find our embodiment, the confusing array of energies that emanate from an inscrutable center that can never see itself, but can only see itself indirectly to that which presents itself to itself. And therefore, Kali is a mystery. Gods don't know what she is. But while she's secret, she's undeniable. She's like an undeniable, ever-present, pervasive thing that you can't really say anything about. That we won't say anything about. Those who are given access to this tradition, they won't say anything about it. Maybe because they can't. How could they ever express something so deep? So Shankaracharya tries. He arguably, if this hymn was written by Shankaracharya, in 8 verses, he attempts to present Kali to the world. And it's incredibly transgressive. He talks about surapana matta. He talks about alcoholism, not alcoholism, but the use of intoxicants in the worship of Mother Kali, which of course references a tradition outside of the pale of Vedic society where these substances are considered transgressive. But that's not even the worst thing, I think, in that hymn. A big part of that has to do with the abhicharas, the 6 ghastly rites of Tantra, and he names them all. And he says the source of all of them is in Mother, Jagan Mohaniyam. She's the one who confounds everyone. So we get our magic because we worship the one who is the supreme sorceress, the supreme confoundress. Shatru, she destroys our shatrus, our enemies. And even Rudira Priya was asking about this earlier. Why is there such a violence in some of these prayers? Why is God depicted as, maybe what a Christian tradition might consider to be some kind of demiurge or devil or something that answers prayers that actually increase chaos in the world, such as uchatana, scaring people away, or marana, killing them, or even just vashikrana, subduing them, deluding them, etc., etc. Mother Kali's energies have always been associated, as Bhairavananda said, with the darkness, but by that we mean the darkness of delusion, of bewilderment, of subjugation, the violence that we find at the core of every heart. And weirdly enough, nobody wants to look at it. Nobody can love it. And all we know how to do is fight it. But look at the world that has created. In trying to be good, look how much evil is wrought in the name of good. No 2 words have caused more violence and problems in the world than God and communism. And both of them are idealistic. Both of them are an attempt to get a utopia. The idea of God as good, as something other than this current world, thank you, Ma, is what people fight for, what people die for. And in the name of God, children are diddled, entire nations are colonized, entire peoples are subjugated and killed mercilessly in the name of a reasonable God of justice and enlightenment. Well, we reject your God. We reject your male deity with your laws of Hammurabi, we say, those of us who worship Mother Kali. We prefer Tiamat, to use the Mesopotamian term. We prefer the wild goddess in the jungle, whose law is not one of morality, whose law is something deeper. It's not even survival of the fittest, actually. Even that doesn't really make sense, because strong things die all the time. Who knows? Yeah, it somehow checks out. An act is committed here, and somehow over there, it makes sense in the context of over there. So if I were to do a curse and kill someone, you might say that's wrong. But that's only because you're thinking in the fragmented way that our society tells us to consider everything in isolation of the whole. But the thing is, we cannot understand the whole. No one can really hold the whole all together at once. It's just too strong of an energetic experience. And so Kali represents that. She represents the whole, but because she is the whole, she cannot be approached in any sort of fragmenting kind of way. And that's challenging. Wholesomeness, true acceptance, true love, true surrender, true peace, true joy will always be the most difficult thing for human beings. Because arguably, in the name of all of those things, we like to make our lives harder. So with the Kali sadhana, when we look at people like Ramprasad, Ramkrishna, Komalakanta, you see there's a strong emphasis on madness. And Sri Shankaracharya, he does his best in that hymn to point us to maybe more philosophically refined ideas like Chidananda, Kandam, Hasanmanda, Mandam. And of course, when he says Muninam Kavinam, he's saying that Kali is worshipped, not necessarily by violent brutes who like to rob people on the street. He's saying look at the people who worship Kali. Yes, there are dacoits, no doubt. There are people who pounce on you in the middle of the night on the street on your way from one village to another, and they drag you back and kill you and offer your head to Kali and then rob you for all that you're worth, and that's what they do. And Kali is their patron deity. She's a robber deity, as it were. She's a deity of wild peoples who are sometimes a problem for urban citizens, moving about in their caravans with their idea of morality and justice and safety. So okay, of course you can't deny that Kali is especially sacred to thugs and to dacoits and to the riffraff, arguably, of urban society. But also, Abhinavagupta, Shankara, also Ramprasad, Komalakanta, these are high-class Brahmins. I mean, in the case of Abhinavagupta, in the case of Jayaratha, these are not just ordinary Brahmanas. They never did any kind of priest work. These kinds of Brahmanas would never stoop so low as to worship a deity in a temple. They didn't need money. These are brahmanas who were state-funded. They are called Rajanakas, meaning they were so intelligent, so brilliant at teaching, and so charming, arguably, that they were welcome in the king's court and just like treated as royals, They lived with the king. And the king, like, great kings like Avanti Varman in Kashmir, in order to win the favor of their people, would then invest huge amounts of money in gurukulas, places of learning, like the world's first universities, for instance. Even before Nalanda, there are examples of court cases, court situations where people would come and learn. It's for the public good, arguably. But these Rajanakas, they had big property, they were like landed gentry, as it were, and they were so refined. I mean, they, from a very young age, learned Sanskrit grammar. Abhinavagupta claims to have learned grammar from his father, Narasimhagupta. By the age of 9, he had mastered it. And someone like Bhairavananda will understand like what that means. It's like, it's not easy. The Ashtadhyayi, like to be able to read Ashtadhyayi at like 9. Even Swami Vivekananda really struggled with it. Even he had tuition. He had to go and like take tuition classes with somebody to learn the Ashtadhyayi. And intellect as prodigious as Swami Vivekananda struggled with that text. Think about Abhinavagupta mastering it by like 10 or 11, legendarily. He's savant, right? Like unreasonably brilliant.
Unreasonable.
Yes.
Unreasonably brilliant.
Unreasonably brilliant. That's a good way of putting it. It's like unreasonably brilliant. And not only that, he's he's very intelligent, he's intellectually capable, but something else that's important about him, he's very artistically refined. Because often you find people, sometimes they're very logical, very mathematical, but they're disconnected from life. They don't maybe feel their bodies quite as much. They're not able to connect to other people. They're not able to sense beauty. So some people might be really great artists, but they might not be very good at like language, at logic, at mathematics. Other people are very good at those quote unquote left brain things, although that's kind of dated. But those people might not be good at art. They might not be musicians. People like Einstein we really adore and respect because we see he's playing violin and he's also a great mathematician. We can see the relationship between those two hemispheres, as it were, in great minds like quote unquote Einstein and others. Abhinava was like that. He was passionate about art, about theater, about poetry. He very regularly frequented the theaters of his time. He was engaged in the aesthetic culture, at that time a very developed aesthetic culture in Kashmir in the 11th century. So he was an artist, he was a poet, he was proficient in many languages, and most importantly, I think the most important thing about him is that he had an insatiable appetite for learning. And he was really liberal in who he chose to learn from. So he learned from Buddhist masters, from Jain masters, he learned from experts in grammar, in theater. It seemed like every mode of knowledge was valid for him. And he didn't make this distinction of, it's apara, apara. Because in the Vedas, sometimes you get this sense that some things are not really worth learning. Like language, like grammar, like mathematics. Shankara's Bhaja Govindam. He says to a young boy practicing his vibhaktis on the beach, on the Ganga, says to him in Varanasi, right? There's a young boy who's like learning Sanskrit grammar. And he's like, Kalikam Dakshinam Divyam. Okay, that's the second case. So, or like, he's doing, or Shivasya. Like, he's thinking about these things. Why is it Shivasya, not Shivasya? And then like, we were just having a discussion about that today. And he's thinking about all these grammar rules, which in Sanskrit are so complex. They're like coding languages, right? And Shankara walks by and he says, stop. Rules of grammar will profit you nothing when the hour of death draws near. Worship Govinda, worship Govinda, worship Govinda, like Bhaja Govinda. Now, the claim here is like kind of anti-intellectual claim. It's like, don't develop your mind, don't be a nerd, like worship God, love God. Don't like develop your aesthetic sense. Why would you do that? It's all worldly, right? Abhinava, I don't think, would agree. I think he felt that the knowledge of the world was innately valuable, innately spiritual, and that until you had a firm grasp on those things, it would be very difficult to understand higher things. So it's almost like the barrier of entry to coming into Tantra is so high because it requires proficiency in the Sanskrit language. It assumes that you have a proficiency in the Sanskrit language. It requires a poetic ability. It requires a defined and articulated aesthetic sense to be able to arrange things beautifully, and above all, a musical sense, right? An artistic sense, to sculpt your images, to draw your yantras, to play music. Abhinava, like Vivekananda, was proficient also in many instruments. His favorite probably was the ektara, or the veena. Although, I think the reason we say he plays the veena is because in Indian aesthetics, the veena is considered to be one of the most difficult instruments to master. So by saying that Abhinava is a master of the veena, that might actually be historically true. But by saying he's a master of the veena, it's implying that he's someone who has mastered music at the highest level and is playing a difficult instrument. So we have people like this. Abhinavagupta, Kshemaraja, his disciple, of course Jayaratha later. Jayaratha was a Srividya practitioner who was sponsored by a very, very famous and powerful king, and he was in the Srividya context. So what we have now is this very interesting paradox. We have what society would consider the lowest of the low, in that they don't even like conform to the rules of society, they're not even part of the caste structure, and they do things that the rest of society would consider abhorrent. Like, they ingest substances that we think it wouldn't be cool to ingest. I think the equivalent would be like huffing nitrous or doing meth or, like, there are cool drugs that white-collar people can do and still be chic about. Like cocaine or maybe Molly, and there are some drugs that we associate with like low culture, right? Whether it's heroin, fentanyl, etc. These things have a bad rep for being popular among people who maybe don't have a lot of means or who are maybe falling through the cracks of society. So it's the kind of substances that they consume. Secondly, it's their sexual practices. Sniffing paint fumes or sniffing glue or like these kinds of things. It's the same thing. We're looking for intoxication. Or cigarettes. Like LA is a good example where people are very uppity about like cigarettes. Like somehow smoking cigarettes is considered to be maybe low class or something. There's just like perception that we have about certain substances. And we say, okay, if you're a refined person, you won't drink like Black Dog, Royal Stag, like all these whiskeys that you get in Tara-Pete, huh? Yeah, like these are all like what, like country liquors, like moonshine kind of thing. You'll drink maybe something more refined or something. But probably you won't even drink at all. You'll be so refined that maybe you don't need like vices, etc. But when it comes to intoxicants, what we drink and what we smoke and what we do in order to feel some kind of ecstasy, some kind of peak experience, these people, these communities are often judged for substances that we don't share. That's one thing. Secondly, in terms of diet, a lot of these cultures might be meat eating. And for Brahmanas, that's a problem because meat is considered to be, it's inherently, arguably a cruel industry. A butcher, is considered the worst caste because they hunt and they kill. So their diet and their sexual habits, a lot of these communities might not have monogamous structures. And in the Vedic society, monogamy, especially in the classical era, is very important. It's like one of the signs of refinement that a person is able to control themselves and have one partner and be married to that partner and fulfill all their duties to that partner as a perfect householder. Whereas these people in the forest are gathering at night on a new moon, ingesting a bunch of moonshine, dancing mad with joy, wild-haired and naked, and having some big orgy or something like that. Or like in Tibet, where polyandry is quite common. Swami Vivekananda was shocked. He went to Tibet and he saw a family and it was a wife being shared amongst many brothers, and he thought that seems unethical. Like, does she have a say in it? This seems abhorrent. And the brothers said to him, no, in our culture, if I got married to this woman and I didn't share her with my brothers, that's considered uncouth. And that allowed Vivekananda, arguably, to make a point about moral relativism. Like, what is absolutely morally abhorrent in one culture is actually considered quite important to do in another. It's an injunction, not a prohibition, weirdly enough. Or like in the Bhagavad Gita, in the Mahabharata rather, where we have like Draupadi with her 5 husbands. That's an interesting example of a non-traditional relationship structure. But although that appears within the Vedic context, you can't deny that people who live in these forests and who practice in this way are considered to be incredibly problematic because of their sexual habits, their polyamory, their polyandry, etc., their substance use, their diet. Everything about them was manifestly problematic. And the worst thing about them, and this is obviously the censure that Romani people get too, is that they're often associated to crime. Because they don't fit into the rest of society, it's very hard for them to get jobs. They don't speak languages that would allow them to get jobs. They might not have the education or any interest in accessing education that would allow them then to speak and function in society. And so necessarily then, a lot of them will have to make their living in ways that society scorns, like selling those substances or like being sex workers, or more importantly, crime. So Jilika, Bhillika, Vallika, all those names that we heard in the Mahishasura Mardini, those are tribes. We're saying this is the goddess of tribes. That's important. In India, indigenous people are seen as like very problematic. A lot of times it's because of the crime that is associated to them. So if you're going from one city to another, probably on the highway you'll be robbed. Right? And then why? Because people live in the jungle, and if you're going through their jungle, they know the jungle better than you. They'll jump out from behind the trees, rob you for all that you're worth, and leave, and maybe even kill you. And then you realize their idea of morality is different from ours. And that's what scares us the most. So we get Kali, who is worshipped by these people, who is associated to these people, and we get Kali, who is worshipped by the highest, most refined individuals of society. Isn't that something worth considering? So now, where do we fit? That's the thing. We might not be in the king's court of Avanti Varman with the level of intellectual depth and aesthetic refinement as Abhinavagupta. And probably we aren't living in the forest, making our living off of highway robbery. We're in the middle, right? And so what Shankara is doing, what Ramakrishna is doing, what Ramprasad, more importantly what Vivekananda is doing, is to bring Kali from both the ends of the spectrum into the middle, as it were, without diluting her presence in both ends of the spectrum. Because the two ends of the spectrum resemble one another, obviously, but to bring her into the middle is the effort, is the task of a community like this. So Shankara presents her in this like incredibly like transgressive way as a source of curses and magic, drinking wine, but then he's also careful to point out the highest Vedanta, the highest Advaitic philosophy, and he brings them together. And he offers them to the people, and he's like, sorry, I've made a very difficult thing available to others at fear of it being misunderstood. So when Ramprasad writes songs, he doesn't write them in Sanskrit. He writes them in the local language of his people, Bengali. This, of course, reminds us of the Buddha, who felt that like teaching should not be confined to Sanskrit. It should be taught in the local languages like Ardha Magadhi, etc. Of course, this means that the Buddhist tradition steps away from the Sanskritic traditions of India. Like, so when you get Tibetan Buddhism, when you get Southeast Asian Buddhism, those texts don't necessarily have the same preservation as some of the maybe Indic like Sanskrit Buddhist texts. So there are obviously like textual reasons why you want to keep things in Sanskrit, but it's elitist. And it means that people cannot access teachings until they become brahmanas or until they get some access to that education. So what Buddha is doing by popularizing things in the local dialect, for the case of the Upanishads, you can see that Ramprasad is doing for Kali. He's taking her out of esoteric tantric Sanskritic circles and bringing them into the vernacular of his people. And most importantly, I think this is the key, is that it's music. You know, Ramprasad presents the teaching of Kali in a way that I think goes deepest with us. Our stories are not told like this, they're told in song. And like human civilization is song, and those are what's passed down. So Ramprasad's songs are immortal. They live in Bengal and all over India, and now increasingly so in America, because they're musical expressions of deep philosophical truths that would otherwise only be available in Sanskrit texts and only accessed by very privileged and very intellectually refined people. That's one thing. But the really crazy thing is that in these songs, he expresses an attitude to God that is really scary. For instance, in one song, he says, "Mother, I will sue you in court." Now, the idea of taking God to court and suing her is kind of strange. Not so in the Christian tradition. I mean, Jacob wrestles God, and only then does he become the king. But again, we don't emphasize this idea of going to war with God, of grabbing her by the hair. We want to relate, but we only want to relate peacefully and joyfully. We want to relate according to our reason and according to our morals. But Ramprasad just wants to relate. He doesn't care how he's relating. He doesn't care whether it's moral. He doesn't care whether it's reasonable. He doesn't even care whether he, will be understood. He just needs to get Kali, and if that means taking her to court and suing her and complaining about her behavior, he'll do it. In another place, he threatens to kill her. But not just kill her, he threatens to eat her. He says one born under this inauspicious star becomes the eater of his mother. And so either I will eat you or you will eat me. So it seems like this is a person who's so intimate with God that he doesn't mind expressing some of the darkest human emotions when it comes to devotion. So that's one thing in the Ramprasad literature that's like unlike any devotional thing in the world. Like even the Shaiva stuff that we get in South India, like it's beautiful, but often it doesn't have this bhava. There's more das bhava. In the Radha Leela also, there's a nice kind of playful bhava, but there's no shatru bhava, God is enemy. There's no violence, there's no desperation, there's no depravity, there's no darkness. Whereas Ramprasad is able to capture that in his devotion. And Ramakrishna, who arguably is, the founder of our lineage, Ramakrishna found deep, deep, deep resonance in those songs. He never composed his own songs. Ramakrishna did not feel the need to compose his own songs because he felt his devotional sentiment perfectly matched in Ramprasad songs. So a lot of what Ramakrishna would do in puja is sing Ramprasad songs to Kali. Songs about wine, songs about curses, songs about killing Kali, etc. Songs about eating her, devouring her, but not like digesting her, keeping her in the belly. All these things, this is something that Ramprasad adds, he contributes this. And the fact that they're in song, the fact that they're in vernacular, I think for the first time in Indian history, gives people, like regular people like you and me, a glimpse into maybe what I would consider the most difficult, most refined, most sophisticated, and yet most universal realization of the grand civilization that is the Indian spiritual tradition. Like the Upanishads are great, the Vedas are great, the Agamas and Tantras are great, but Kali is best. I would argue what she points to, the reality that she points to, transcends Veda and Agama, transcends culture. But it was within this culture that it was discovered, and within this culture it was kept incredibly secret, and now it is the burden of this culture to make that secret available so it can be recognized in a non-cultural, trans-cultural way. And so we're really beholden to people like Ramprasad, like Sri Ramakrishna. We're beholden to people like Komalakanta, Swami Vivekananda, to, of course, Holy Mother who embodied all of this, to people like Aparanandaji who composed our Parati actually, to people like my Gurudeva, of course, Swami Bhajananandaji at the Kali Mandir, and every single one of you here. We're all contributing to something that I think is actually, truly, deeply good. Because it's the one thing that doesn't try to be. If nothing else, I think this, above all, is an attempt to be honest, to be real, to relate to one another without all the trappings and pretense of spiritual life. There's no way that humans get together without putting all sorts of clothes on it, you know? We need to be seen a certain way. We all crave to be like received by society in a certain way. And so when we enter a space like this, you're hyper aware of like, I don't want to do this wrong because I don't want to bring attention to myself because I don't want everyone to think X or Y is that. Or I need to do something to get everyone's attention so that they'll think I'm like channeling or like, you're like, there's all this sense in which we're trying to convey to others an idea of who we think we are. But with Kali, the rawness and the intimacy with which we relate to her should hopefully help us relate to one another. A relation that like allows for everything, the whole spectrum of human emotion, that is able to look at all the horror in the world and say, Jai Ma, I'm okay with that. Because that requires that we look at all the horror within ourselves and say, Jai Ma, I'm okay with that. So the worship of a horrible God who confounds moral sense, who confounds reason, might be the only reasonable, only good thing that you can do in this world of pretense. So in closing, we would say, fuck morals, fuck reason. Both the lowest, quote unquote, and highest members of Indian society came to the same conclusion: that's no way to live. And those of us who are trapped in the middle, who make such idols of our reason, of our intellect, we should choose this idol instead. Because this is the idol that destroys all idols. This is the deluder that deludes us into truth. This is the darkness in which true seeing is available. So when we come to Kali, we say, let's worship at night. Let's worship in the cremation ground. Let's use substances that people hate. Let's go into the crossroads, into the forests. Let's worship darkness. Let's try things a little differently than we have been throughout the cultural trajectory. And it's possible that this Kali Yuga, our job is just to destroy everything. It's possible this is actually what the Christians fear, Satanism. If so, I'm sorry, I chose my side. Good luck. I'll meet you on the battlefield. Michael, good luck. So we're going to go to the Kali Puja at the Hollywood Vedanta Temple now. But in closing, thank you all so very much for coming online, for coming in person. This is such a special Kali Puja for us. And on a personal note, usually we're always at the Hollywood Temple, we're always at the Vedanta Temple. It's been hard to kind of understand where we fit in the context of all the other Kali stuff that's going on. And I've been working really hard to present everything with the best possible PR, which of course I learned from the role models that I have in the community. And if we present Kali in all of her transgression, it leads to so many problems, of course. There are like internal problems, symmetries and keeping people safe and not creating a space in which people can come to harm or stuff like that. That's one thing. But also in presenting Kali, we might miss out on some of the best stuff, some of the most liberating things in Mother Kali because we're afraid of what people will think about our traditions. So when we approach, especially the West, and what to say of India now, above all, how difficult it is to talk about Kali in the place of her first worship, right? So like to present Kali is something we're all very tentative and scared about. We do it very gingerly. And so for a long time, I've been maybe trying to toe the party line of presenting her in a more like Dakshinachara way, presenting her in a way that I think would be palatable, not just to Western people, but like society in general. And it didn't feel authentic. Insofar as Kali worship is about authenticity and honesty, I have to acknowledge that I wasn't being as honest or authentic as I could be because I much preferred to present Kali in a way that I thought would be socially acceptable than to actually just relate to Kali and present her in the way that I experience her, I love her. Present her in the way that I'm inspired in, like not my experience, but like Ramkrishna, Ramprasad, like the aspects of those people and their experiences that I felt really excited about sharing, I have self-censored in some way, shape or form. So for that I apologize, but I also deeply want to thank you for this because you being here has affirmed something in me. It has showed me that like there is a community in the world that will get it, and it is for that community that we should do any of this at all. That Kali does not need to be presented to the whole world. She only needs to be presented to her bhaktas. And to have met her bhaktas has changed everything for me. And so this year is important. We're not just rushing off to some other temple to like engage in their puja, which I used to love to do because I always thought that that's better. Like we can go to the Vedanta side. Of course we have to. My Gurudeva is there. I love it. It's like it's nothing else. We have to. It's so great. But this time there was a little less pressure around all of that. It felt like what we need is right here. You know, for the first time I feel that what we need is right here. What we need is in each other, and there's no desire anymore for anything more than this moment, to relate to each other in this way. There's no desire for anything more than this altar, than this puja, than this murti. Finally this year I'm starting to feel that in a way that I never have before. And I only have all of you to thank. So I just wanted to express that. Thank you so, so much for freeing us to be honest, free, and wild, because you are. So may this be an offering to Kali, who is embodied in each and every one of you, as a wild, radical challenge to a reasonable, moralistic society. We'll meet you all on the battlefield. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat. Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. Shri Sarada Arpanamastu. Shri Vivekananda Arpanamastu. Shri Kali Arpanamastu. Shri Kaula Marga Arpanamastu. Shri Sangha Arpanam Astu. Om Shanti Shanti.
Okay.
Jump.
Where's the mouth?
There's a what is it? The amphetamines closet. No, I'm not.